If you use dairy products and you have a weight loss goal in mind, some are actually really great to use for fat burning, while others actively will be working against your goals. Today I'm breaking down 20 different dairy products and rating them on their fat burning abilities in today's video. Alright guys, if you're new to my channel and you don't know who I am, my name's Autumn and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's nutrition human performance. On my channel, I'm typically talking about the science-backed and holistic methods that you can use in order to achieve your wellness dreams. So if you have a wellness goal in mind, make sure you subscribe. Now when it comes to dairy, the history is actually really interesting, or at least I think it's really interesting, because there are really only two different ways that something can evolve. One is from an original source, like for example, blue eyes. Blue eyes is literally apparently traced back to one single person who had the mutation of blue eyes. The other is that the mutation shows up in different populations throughout the whole history. And this is actually what happened with the ability to break down lactose, or the milk sugar. And this is called lactase persistence. And this is why some people have something called lactose intolerance, where they can get bloating or stomach aches from having dairy products, because they don't have that lactase enzyme to break it down. And milk products have been consumed at least for the past 5,000 years. In fact, there's evidence of cheese making up to 7,200 years ago in Southern Europe. There are even people to this day who, like the Maasai in Africa, only eat meat, milk, and blood. And since then, various cultures all across the world have created their own versions of dairy products, ranging from kefir to yogurt to parmesan, and even to the United States' beloved skim milk. Now, do you need to use dairy products in order to achieve a weight loss goal? No, of course not. But if you love dairy products and it's something that you want to continue to use, then you need to make sure that you're using the right type of dairy products in order to achieve your goals. And with the 20 dairy products that I'll be rating, starting from the worst to the best, this is also to make sure that you are getting the highest quality possible that's available to you, preferably grass-fed and organic, and if you can find it, raw as well. As with any type of food, using the highest quality possible is essential. Now here's the basis of the scoring system that I'm going to be using for the 20 different dairy products. As you guys know from my previous videos, we really want to focus on protein and fat for satiety purposes and to make sure we can get those gaps between meals. That will also promote that stable blood glucose level that will allow you to tap into fat burning mechanisms. We also preferably want to limit the lactose, which is the milk sugar or milk carbohydrate. This will help to keep the insulin level, remember that storing hormone, low, and therefore further tap into fat burning mechanisms, as well as any possible issues that could go along with lactose, such as bloating, especially if you aren't someone that has developed the lactase enzyme to break down the lactose. Now let's jump into this list of 20 different dairy products, starting with the absolute worst one, and that is number 20, gelato. Now 1 cup of vanilla gelato will have about 6 grams of protein, 40 grams of carbohydrates, and 12 grams of fat. Now gelato does have less fat than typical ice cream, which means it's also going to be less satiating, and it packs in a lot more sugar than traditional ice cream. This is probably why when I was studying abroad in Italy, studying the Mediterranean diet, I had so many scoops of gelato because it's so addicting. Dang it, Talenti. Now this massive amount of not just lactose but also sugar, just straight regular sugar, causes that rapid increase in insulin, the storing hormone, and shuts off the fat burning. And something unique about gelato versus a lot of the dairy products that we're going to be going over today is that it also contains sucrose, or just regular cane sugar. And sucrose contains both glucose and fructose. These are just simple forms of sugar, and fructose specifically can cause a lot of issues because it needs to be broken down by the liver, and as long as it's taking up time in the liver to be broken down into a usable source of energy, glucose can't be addressed and stored as glycogen in the liver. That means that the blood glucose level will stay higher, and as a result the insulin will stay even higher because it still hasn't been addressed, and more insulin will be produced as a result, which can long term, if not addressed, lead to something called insulin resistance and make it even more difficult to achieve your weight loss goal. Not to mention all the health implications that can go along with it, such as type 2 diabetes. Alright, number 19, regular ice cream. I mean, we knew it was coming if gelato was first, right? So 1 cup of vanilla ice cream contains about 5 grams of protein, about 33 grams of carbohydrates, and roughly 16 grams of fat. Of course, this can vary depending on the brand. Now, ice cream doesn't get a health halo because it has less sugar than gelato. Just want to clarify, because it still does contain the added sucrose or added sugar that's separate from that milk sugar of lactose. So we still get those issues of elevated fructose, we still get those issues of elevated insulin and blood glucose levels, and the complete shut off of fat burning mechanisms as a result. And PS, the effects of insulin are so strong that stimulating it causes insulin to have effect in your body for up to 3 to 5 hours after your meal. Ooh. All right, number 18, skim milk. 1 cup of skim milk has about 8 grams of protein, roughly 12 grams of carbohydrates, and 0 grams of fat. Now, skim milk is really the wonder child of the 80s and 90s revolution of not having any fat in the diet whatsoever. All it is essentially milk with fat removed. So with skim milk, you get a moderate amount of protein and comparably a moderately high amount of carbohydrates. Granted, no added sugar, which is good, but it will still leave insulin higher and as a result make you more hungry very shortly after having it. Remember, both protein and fat are needed for that long-term satiation, and skim milk is completely lacking in it. All right, number 17, 2% milk. Now, 1 cup of 2% milk will have about the same amount of protein and carbohydrates as the skim milk. It just contains 5 grams of fat instead of 0. So for that reason, it does make it slightly more satiating and slightly better for your wellness and weight loss goals, but you still get the issues of not as much satiety as you would with number 16 of whole milk. Now, 1 cup of whole milk still contains that same amount of protein and carbohydrates as the skim as well as the 2%. However, it also contains about 8 grams of fat in order to keep you more satiated. Now, regardless, beware if you are lactose sensitive or if you don't have that lactase enzyme, because these 3 milk products, regardless of even if it is that whole milk product, will still contain a lot of lactose and therefore cause a lot of bloating if you don't have that lactase enzyme. All right, number 15, fat-free yogurt, another wonder child of the fat-free era. Now, typical serving is about 5.3 ounces of yogurt, and of course the fat-free option contains 0 grams of fat, but it still contains about 7 grams of protein as well as about 10 grams of carbohydrates. Now, just as with the skim milk, it contains 0 of the fat that is needed in order to have that long-term satiety. And this is all assuming that the fat-free yogurt contains 0 added sugar, which is very likely not the case. Because the thing is, with fat-free yogurt, it's not gonna taste very good. So what most companies do instead is they add in a lot more sugar in order to get that same mouthfeel that you would get with fat. And of course, that added sugar will cause that really big spike in insulin, really big spike in that storing mode, and completely work against your weight loss goals. All right, number 14, full fat yogurt. Now, full fat yogurt typically will have a little bit more of the actual lactose, or about 12 grams of the carbohydrates, as the fat-free yogurt, and it will contain roughly the same amount of protein at 8 grams, but it also contains around 9 grams of fat. Now, because of this, full fat is the better option than the low fat or no fat yogurts, because it is more satiating and because then you can get that break between meals for the fat burning benefits. However, again, if you are lactose sensitive, this still is not a good option because it still does contain a higher amount of lactose and could cause bloating if you are lactose intolerant. And number 13, kefir. And kefir is a fermented milk product, which is great because then you also get the beneficial bacteria that goes along with it for gut health. Plus, a cup of it contains around 8 grams of that satiating protein, roughly 10 grams of the carbohydrates, and 9 grams of that satiating fat. As it is fermented, it is going to contain slightly less lactose than if you're to use regular milk. And because it is fermented, it's going to have slightly less of the carbohydrates than the regular milk, which means less of a spike of the insulin or that storing hormone. But again, if you're lactose intolerant, this is still not a good option when it comes to bloating. But if you're looking for some of that good gut health benefits and you're not lactose intolerant, then an occasional cup of kefir is fantastic. Okay, number 12, ricotta cheese. Now, 1/2 cup of ricotta contains around 9 grams of protein, as well as 9 grams of those carbohydrates and roughly 13 grams of fat. Now, it's typically a fresh cheese, which means it's not been aged or fermented. However, there are some aged varieties, but for the purposes of this, I'm referring to the more common fresh ricotta. Now, as you guys may have noticed with the ricotta, it's starting to get higher in the protein and lower in the carbohydrates. So as we get lower down this list, you'll see that shift from lowering the carbohydrates and increasing the protein, as well as slightly increasing the fat, which is great, especially for weight loss goals. This is what we want in order to keep you satiated and get that gap between meals to stimulate those fat burning mechanisms. All right, number 11, labna or labne. One of my clients always laughs at me because I say it wrong, but I'm gonna go with labna or labne. I'll probably switch it up. Now, another 5.3 ounce serving of labna, I'm really self-conscious about saying it wrong now, contains around 16 grams of protein, which is a lot more than the previous amounts that we've talked about with the other dairy products. It also contains around 8 grams of carbohydrates and 16 grams of fat. Labna is essentially a strained yogurt, so it's going to have a slightly sour taste. I think it's amazing, but also because of that higher protein and higher fat, as well as the lower carbohydrate content, it's going to keep you satiated longer. Which brings us to number 10 as Greek yogurt. A same serving size of Greek yogurt is actually going to have a lot less fat. However, it's also going to have less carbohydrates. So that's why I placed it below labna or labne. Now, the higher the amount of carbohydrate, the higher the response of insulin, especially if you're carbohydrate sensitive, which if you find that you have difficulties losing weight, then you might be. And when those insulin levels are higher, this leaves you feeling hungry because insulin has effectively locked up your fat cells so that they can't be used as an energy source, making it so that you need to feel hungry in order to replace that fuel. And with weight loss, one of the main goals is to really improve that satiety so that you don't feel hungry, so that your body's actually able to tap into the fat burning mechanisms. All right, number 9, half and half. Now, 1 tablespoon of half and half contains about half a gram of protein and 0.7 grams of carbohydrates and 1.6 grams of fat. And that's assuming it's a high quality half and half without any added sugar. And it's not that half and half is good for you, it's just not really bad either. It is very low in the carbohydrates, which is great, but it's not very satiating. So if you use it for your coffee or for your teas, just make sure that you don't add any sugar to it. All right, number 8, regular cottage cheese. Now, cottage cheese is really high in protein, which makes it really satiating. About a cup of it contains 23 grams of protein, as well as only 7 grams of carbohydrate and 9 grams of fat. But it's kind of a hit or miss one with most people. I mean, I actually really love it, but my fiance does not. He hates it. But just that 1 cup of the cottage cheese really packs in a lot of that satiating and bioavailable protein that can actively be used in the body. Just make sure to not add any type of sugar on top of it. Okay, number 7, soft cheeses. So I'm talking about things like mozzarella, for example. So about an ounce of soft cheeses contains 6 grams of protein, 1 gram of carbohydrate, and 7 grams of fat. Now, cheeses in general are going to be really low in the carbohydrates, which is fantastic, especially for keeping that insulin low and for tapping into fat burning mechanisms. But these soft cheeses are also going to have higher amounts of the lactose than their aged varieties. And because it does contain a pretty sizable amount of protein as well as fat in just a 1 ounce serving, it's going to keep you pretty satiated as well. Just make sure not to pair it with any crackers or dried fruits, because that will then increase the insulin and completely bypass those mechanisms of satiation. Okay, number 6, sour cream. Now, sour cream is pretty similar to half and half, where it's just, not bad, but it also just really doesn't do much. 1 ounce of sour cream contains around 1 gram of protein, 1 gram of carbohydrate, and 5 grams of fat. So you do get some of that satiating fat as well as a very tiny amount of protein in there, and the carbohydrate count is pretty minimal, but it's not going to be significant for keeping you satiated. Number 5, heavy whipping cream. Now, between half and half and heavy whipping cream, I usually recommend the heavy whipping cream because it does contain more of the fat and even less of the carbohydrates than the half and half variety, which means it will keep you satiated longer for that reason. In fact, when I'm on vacation, my go-to coffee add-on, if I can't have my keto coffee, is just a tablespoon of half and half. Now, it's not quite as satiating as the keto coffee, but it still does the trick of really keeping those insulin levels low and keeping you a little bit more satiated, especially when compared to a lot of the typical type of coffees, such as a vanilla latte coming in at around 30 to 40 grams of added sugar. Ugh. Number 4, whey protein powder. Now, 1 serving of whey protein contains around 24 grams of protein, as well as 4 grams of carbohydrates, although this can really vary between that 0 to 4 grams depending on the brand, and 1 gram of fat. Now, if whey protein works for your body, it has consistently been shown time after time again as one of the best types of protein powders that you can use in order to achieve your weight loss and fitness goals. Although I don't believe that protein powder is necessary in order to achieve your goals, if you like to use it, whey protein, and if it works for your body, is one that's really great for helping to keep you satiated as well as rebuild your muscles. Just make sure that you do opt for a high quality grass-fed type of whey protein powder that contains 0 grams of added sugar for your best weight loss benefit. Number 3, butter. Now, butter contains essentially 0 protein, 0 carbohydrates, and packs in about 12 grams of fat in a tablespoon. And it's also interchangeable with ghee. Ghee is just a clarified version of butter, which means that it's going to be essentially free of lactose. So if you are lactose sensitive, both butter and ghee are good options. I, of course, use it in my keto coffee, and I find it really great for those who are new to intermittent fasting to use butter with their keto coffee to keep them satiated while having that balanced blood glucose and insulin level during their fasted period. And if you're curious about how keto coffee does not break your fast, I have a really great video on it right here. Number 2, aged cheeses. So I'm talking about things like sharp cheddar or Parmesan. Just 1 ounce of aged cheeses will have about 7 grams of protein and less than a gram of carbohydrate, as well as 10 grams of fat. These aged or hard cheeses have been aged for a long time, which means that it's been able to break down the lactose, also making it something that's really great for those who are lactose intolerant, as well as for those who are carbohydrate sensitive. As I mentioned, it has less than a gram of carbohydrates, meaning that it really won't stimulate your insulin response and therefore will boost satiety, making it so that you have those gaps between meals and can tap into fat burning. Again, just make sure not to pair it with any crackers or with any dried fruits, as these will then cause the spike in insulin and completely bypass the benefits of having the aged cheese. And the number 1, which I have to admit, when first doing research on this wasn't the one I was expecting to have as my number 1 placeholder, but here it is. Drum roll, please. Halloumi. Now, halloumi is a type of cheese that originated in Cyprus, and in fact, I had it for the first time when I was visiting Greece, and it's amazing. Because it's a harder type of cheese, you can actually have it grilled or just cooked, and it makes it a really great vegetarian option for a protein source, because 1 serving of halloumi does come in at about 22 grams of protein, which is about the same amount of protein you would have with something like a small chicken breast. It also comes in at 1 gram of carbohydrate and 25 grams of fat. So 1 pretty large serving is going to keep you very satiated, and I can say that from experience experience, it really does keep you satiated. In fact, you probably don't even need a full serving. However, it is not lactose free, so again, just make sure you keep that in mind if you are lactose intolerant, but otherwise it does contain that high amount of protein as well as that high amount of fat, making it a really great source to keep you satiated between meals. Now, I highly recommend that you check out my video on the 10 health foods that actually aren't healthy right here. Also, if you're new to my channel and you love the science-backed information on how you can achieve your goals, make sure you subscribe right here. Come out with new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.